Welcome or welcome back to What's the Obsession. This video is going to be discussing the Delphi murder case and the upcoming trial of Richard Allen and some information that we have learned along the way since Richard Allen was arrested regarding his connections to certain people and groups, and particularly in this video, Keegan Kline. So as the true crime world awaits the trial of Richard Allen, who knows what the information and details that will be learned through the trial will reveal about this crime. One thing we do know, due to a recent court filing by the defense team for Richard Allen, is that they may call Keegan Kline as a witness to the Delphi murder case. The motion by Allen's attorney asked the judge to order Kline transported to the court from prison where he is currently serving time. The defense motion says Kline would be called as a witness to testify and that the date of his testimony remains uncertain. Kline is currently serving a 40-year prison sentence after pleading guilty to charges of child P. As you probably know, or maybe you don't know, Kline was behind the online profile that talked with Libby German in the days leading up to her death, that infamous profile, Anthony Shots. And Keegan Kline has been at the center of both conspiracy theories, online conspiracy theories surrounding this case, but he's also been the subject of some very real questions relating to Richard Allen, because there are some very real connections that can be made between Richard Allen and Keegan Kline, and the question has always lingered. Did Keegan Kline have anything to do with this horrible crime? Did he know about it? Did he help cover it up? Did he help plan it? What did he give law enforcement in exchange for some niceties while he was going to be sitting in prison for a while on those horrible charges that were brought against him? This video is going to explore the detailed, in-depth connection between Keegan Kline and Richard Allen, and we're going to talk about what happened in November of 2023, just about a year ago, that made people even more suspicious of a possible and some think even probable connection between Keegan Kline, Richard Allen, and the Delphi murders. Since the arrest of Richard Allen in 2022, the arrest that shocked the world as it happened 5 years after this crime was committed. And remember, the investigators were so tight-lipped about anything having to do with the Delphi murders. I've created a number of videos about the Delphi murders, and also just on this topic, the connection between Richard Allen and Keegan Kline. I always read all of your comments. As I've read through subscriber and viewer comments on the videos, people have contributed some really interesting insight and ideas, and others have questioned, what is the connection really? There's obviously no connection here. I don't see how this connection is being made. So I just want to lay it out and make it really clear. And you can, of course, determine for yourself if you think that there is a connection. I personally believe the connection is nearly undeniable. So I want to start by looking at both the beginning, when the murders occurred, and the end, when Richard Allen was finally arrested over 5 years later. Starting with the timeline of how the investigation progressed in the beginning, one of the reasons this timeline of the investigation is so important is because it allows us to know what investigators knew and when, at least some of what investigators knew and when, because there has always been a lot of information in the Delphi murder case that has not been released to the public. So it was, of course, on February 14th, 2017, that the bodies of Liberty German and Abby Williams were found, and it was announced to the public late in that day. On February 15th, investigators found Liberty German's phone and found that she had taken a recording of somebody walking down the bridge. This person later became known as Bridge Guy. And police released a grainy still photo of Bridge Guy immediately on February 15th. On February 22nd, police released a portion of the audio from the recording on Liberty German's phone. That is the infamous Down the Hill recording. It would not be known by the public until years later that that recording was actually 43 seconds long. Investigators, of course, knew this all along, so investigators had this 43-second recording from go. On July 17, 2017, about 5 months after the murders, police released the first composite sketch of Bridge Guy. It should be noted that all along in these first 5 months after the murder and in years to come, the family and friends and community of Abby Williams and Libby German were extremely active in getting word out and doing anything and everything that they could to find the murderer and find justice for the two girls. From the day the girls went missing until even now, droves of people were calling in tips and providing information about who they believed was involved in committing these heinous murders. Although some of the information was irrelevant or even false, investigators were given plenty of information by both the citizens of Delphi, the surrounding community, and literally across the country. According to Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter, the investigation was an active investigation all along. Now, it wasn't until April 22nd, 2019, when investigators released the second composite sketch of the suspect who committed these murders. This definitely threw people for a loop, as the second sketch looked much younger than the first, and they didn't look too much alike, but we will get back to that a little bit later. There were details that were known to investigators that the public found out later, including the fact that an FBI agent had noticed in regards to the crime scene that pieces of clothing from one of the victims was missing, and that it, quote, appeared the girls' bodies were moved and staged, end quote. They also noted that there was no visible signs of a struggle or fight. Also released later on is that they did recover fibers and unknown hairs from the crime scene. When you consider all that was learned in the very beginning of the investigation that I mentioned along the timeline and the additional information investigators knew that was later revealed to the public, they had access to a lot of information about this killer since literally the day of the murders or the day after the murders. Let's talk about Keegan Kline. Keegan Kline's home is in Peru, Indiana, and it was searched on February 23rd, 2017, just 10 days after Abby and Libby were murdered. Cops searched his house on unrelated CP charges. At the time, it wasn't until August of 2020 when Keegan Kline was arrested on CP and child exploitation charges that resulted in 30 felony charges and a trial scheduled down the road. Keegan Kline, after his arrest, and questioned him about the charges and who may have had access to his electronic devices. While they focused on questioning him about his dad, he vehemently denied that his father had any access to his electronic devices, saying that he wouldn't let him have his electronic devices for very long. While Keegan Kline admitted to talking to Libby German under the Anthony Schatz social media profile, he said that he did not talk to her the day before or the day of the murders. The Anthony profile social media persona was scheduled to meet Libby on the day of the murders, and Keegan Kline also vehemently denied that it was him behind the Anthony Schatz profile talking to Libby. Police gave Keegan Kline a polygraph examination, to which the polygraph test rendered truthful when Keegan Kline said that he had not talked to Libby using the Anthony Schatz social media profile for 2 weeks before the murders. Again, the polygraph results said that he was truthful in that statement of not talking to her for 2 weeks before the murders. On that same polygraph exam, When Keegan Kline was asked if he knew who committed the murders, he answered no. The polygraph results were deceptive. Now let's fast forward to August of 2022. In August of 2022, it was learned that investigators were searching the Wabash River just 2 miles from where Keegan Kline lived. The search of the Wabash River was the event that intensified the investigation that eventually led up to the arrest of Richard Allen on October 26, 2022. Now, what was the catalyst that caused investigators to search the Wabash River in the first place? Well, that remained under wraps until November 15th, 2022, when we learned what that catalyst was. When a police source had confirmed to News Channel 8 that the recent 5-week state police search of the Wabash River in Peru was connected to the Delphi investigation. Connection. Now remember, it's the search of the Wabash River in August of 2022 that intensified the investigation that eventually led up to the arrest of Richard Allen a little over 2 months later. The police source goes on to say that the search was initiated after Keegan Kline told police they would find a cell phone and a weapon in the river. That evidence was, in fact, never found, and Kline is known for lying to investigators, so we do need to know more about this bit of information before making a conclusive judgment on this information. Now, regardless of whether Keegan Kline was lying or not about knowing that there was a cell phone and a weapon in the Wabash River, this is what I believe is important. Again, it's this 5-week search of the Wabash River that intensified the investigation that just 2.5 months later, after well over 5 years, an arrest was made with charges of 2 counts of murder for the murder of Abby Williams and Liberty German. In my opinion, it's like this. Although Keegan Kline may not have given investigators correct information that led them to finding Richard Allen finally, which led to his arrest, I believe telling them that they needed to search the Wabash River because there was a cell phone and weapon in there was either, maybe the beginning or the middle of Keegan Kline throwing things out to investigators, perhaps an effort to play games with them, that ultimately led to Keegan Kline giving them good information that led to the arrest of Richard Allen. The timing is just too coincidental for me. Is this all enough to convince you that there was a connection between Keegan Kline and Richard Allen? Well, wait, there's more. Now remember, there were 30 child sexual abuse and child exploitation felony charges against Keegan Kline. And the timing is like this. Prosecutors filed a motion just days after Richard Allen was arrested for some of those charges to be dropped. And another request has been filed to downgrade the remaining charges. The charges of child sexual abuse and child exploitation, felony charges, all of them. So here's a quote from the prosecutor's office. There is insufficient evidence to prove said counts beyond reasonable doubt at trial. What? If you're thinking this timing is extremely suspicious, you're definitely not alone. So what if the polygraph exam results were correct in saying that Keegan Kline was being truthful when he said he hadn't talked to Libby through the Anthony Schatz profile in 2 weeks before the murders? Well, we know that someone was talking to Libby through the Anthony Schatz profile and was in fact one of the last persons to talk to Libby before the death of Abby and Libby. So who was that then? It had to be somebody. Phone records don't lie. Could it have been Richard Allen? Because Richard Allen was arrested for murdering Abby and Libby, and these murders happened on the very same day the person using the Anthony Schott social media profile was supposed to meet Libby while she was on her hike with Abby on the Monon High Bridge Trail. Coincidence enough for you? This is way too many coincidences for me. I'll say it again. If Richard Allen's arrest wasn't enough to convince someone that he was there on the Monon High Bridge Trail and committed the murders, well, we also have this, another dot to connect. It is that Richard Allen, who was arrested in the murders of Abby Williams and Liberty German, had told a state conservation officer he was in the area on the day of the killings, but his report may have been considered unfounded. And this is a police source telling News Channel 8. So Richard Allen, he's age 50, apparently went to the conservation officer right after Abby and Libby's murders on February 17th, 2017. And he told the conservation officer that he was on the Monon High Bridge that afternoon, but he didn't see the two girls. Again, this is what the police source tells News Team 8. So apparently, Allen's statement was forgotten until recently, when Indiana police became frustrated when the status of the Delphi investigation, and they asked a group of investigators to look over some files that were related to the case. So this article also says that investigators believe Allen is the man on the bridge in the cell phone video and in the sketches released by police. And again, this is a police source telling News Team 8. If you can't believe what you heard, you probably did hear it right. Richard Allen himself put himself on the Monon High Bridge Trail on the day of the murders, the afternoon of the murders, when it was the afternoon when Libby and Abby went on their hike. And he told a conservation officer of this on February 17th, 2017, just a couple days after the murders. And I mean, come on, guys. Okay, so let's start to wrap this up. Wrap up why connecting all of these dots leads one to an understanding that Richard Allen and Keegan Kline were in fact connected. Let's again talk about the size of Delphi, Indiana. Delphi, Indiana is 2.51 square miles, very small in size. And the population, as of the 2020 census, is 2,975 people. That's less than 3,000 people. I mean, put that into perspective. Think of a sports stadium that holds tens of thousands of people, or perhaps your high school had a student body of this size. Most colleges and universities certainly have a student body much larger than the population of Delphi. Less than 3,000 people. Richard Allen was one of those residents of Delphi, Indiana, one of those 2,975 people, and he lived very close to Liberty, and he worked right in town in the only pharmacy that there is in Delphi, Indiana, as a pharmacy technician who interacted regularly with the public. He was highly visible. Many residents of Delphi knew Richard Allen. You can find their interviews on various news channels by just doing a quick search right now and hear them speak. So it's not as though this guy was hiding under a rock or hiding in a boarded up house. He was very much out there. His face was out there. He was out in the public, working with the public, talking to the public with his voice that said down the hill. In that same voice, it doesn't seem to me like he disguised it that much when you do a voice comparison of Richard Allen's voice samples to the down the hill audio sample. They sound very much alike, and they look very much alike when you look at the audiograph. Now, I'm not trying to knock on Doug Carter. I'm not trying to knock on investigators necessarily. But man, in a town of under 3,000 people in well over 5 years, investigators from various organizations were not able to make an arrest for the murders of a 13 and 14-year-old girl in over 5 years. Well, just over 5 years. I think that's freaking incredible, especially considering the murder suspect went to an officer 3 days after the murders and said, I was in the exact spot the girls were last known to be in at the exact same time the girls were known to be there. But I didn't see them, and the investigators lost the files. So regardless of what the investigators may or may not have done wrong, we must remember that overall, the timing when we look at this case over 5.5 years, not a single arrest directly related to the murders of a 13 and 14-year-old girl. Keegan Kline has been in jail for a couple years. He is released from prison in August 2022, which starts the investigation of the Wabash River, which starts the intensification of the investigation, which leads to the arrest of Richard Allen just 2.5 months later. Days later, prosecutors drop 5 of the 30 felony charges. They make a statement that they're looking to reduce the rest of them. And days later, after that, it's finally released to the public that it was in fact Keegan Kline that initiated that search of the Wabash River by telling investigators that there was a cell phone and a weapon in the river. So let's connect the dots here, putting everything together that's been mentioned in this video and some other facts you might know that I didn't even mention here. What is the most reasonable conclusion that you can make? Is there a connection between Keegan Kline and Richard Allen? One of the main questions that has been asked about the Delphi murders is, was Keegan Kline really involved? Did Richard Allen and Keegan Kline know one another somehow? And most importantly, were they connected through some kind of sick child pornography ring? I will be talking about the reasons why many people think that yes, Richard Allen and Keegan Kline must have been connected. But first, let's go over what's been going on with Keegan Kline. An Indiana judge dropped multiple charges of child pornography against Keegan Kline just days after Richard Allen was arrested. Keegan Kline was accused of talking to Libby on the very day that she was murdered. Keegan Kline allegedly confessed to investigators in 2020 that he used a fake profile and fake photos to lure in underage girls via social media. So that was the Anthony Schatz profile. He also admitted that he spoke with Libby on both Instagram and Snapchat before her death. Now remember, there were 30 child sexual abuse and child exploitation felony charges against Keegan Kline. And the timing is like this. Prosecutors filed a motion just days after Richard Allen was arrested for some of those charges to be dropped. And another request has been filed to downgrade the remaining charges. The charges of child sexual abuse and child exploitation, felony charges, all of them. So here's a quote from the prosecutor's office. There is insufficient evidence to prove said counts beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. What? If you're thinking this timing is extremely suspicious, you're definitely not alone. Although investigators have been holding their cards tight to the vest and very few details have been released regarding the investigation into the Delphi murders, we do know a few things, and we know a lot of these few things based on the leaked 2020 transcript of investigators' interview with Keegan Kline. So here's what the transcript of that 2020 interview with Keegan Kline shows. It shows that he failed a polygraph examination when he said he didn't know who killed the girls. So Kline says, I don't know who killed the girls. Polygraph says deceptive, indicating that he did know who killed the girls. The same polygraph exam revealed that Kline was being truthful when he said that he stopped messaging with Libby in the catfish persona of Anthony Schatz 2 weeks before the murder. So again, to that question, the polygraph indicated that Keegan Kline was truthful in saying, I stopped messaging her 2 weeks before the murders. When investigators told Kline that they believe he spoke with Libby during her overnight stay with Abby before they took their fatal hike, he initially denied it. But the messages continued on Libby's phone, although the messages were deleted from Kline's phone. This led investigators to start to wonder if someone stepped into Kline's place in the Anthony Schatz persona for the last 2 weeks leading up to the murders. In questioning Keegan Kline, investigators said to him, quote, so during the time frame where this grooming would have been built up to meeting, the history is gone. It's wiped from your phone. So now it all starts to stack up. The complexity of your Anthony Schatz persona, the cars, the influence of Lamborghinis, Ferraris. It's not you. It's not your idea. You and I both know it's not your idea. The complexity of it, okay? It's just not you. Even under that line of questioning, Keegan Kline never copped to anything. It should also be noted that Keegan Kline was temporarily released from jail to the custody of Indiana State Police in August. He was released the very day that officers began a 5-week search of the Indiana Wabash River. This intensive search eventually led to the arrest of Richard Allen. Meanwhile, Allen has pleaded not guilty and is reportedly being uncooperative with investigators. So when we put everything together here, we have an extremely curious situation, or maybe it's not curious at all. Maybe it's very obvious and telling. We have these very serious charges against Keegan Kline. 30 charges of child pornography and exploitation. Those are very serious charges, as I'm sure you well know. All of a sudden, just days after Richard Allen's arrest, prosecutors decide to drop 5 of those charges and then a few days later announce that they're going to try to reduce the remaining. That is just, crazy on its face right there. Let's factor in the polygraph examination results, finding that Kline was truthful when he said that he hadn't talked to Libby 2 weeks prior to the murders, and that he was deceptive in saying that he did not know who committed the murders of Abby and Libby. Factoring in Keegan Kline being temporarily released from prison in August, which started a ramp up of an intensive investigation that led to Richard Allen's arrest. What is the most reasonable conclusion one could make as we put all of these facts together? Did Keegan Kline know that Richard Allen committed these murders? Did Keegan Kline share his Anthony Schatz profile with Richard Allen and some other people, perhaps as part of a larger child pornography, child exploitation ring? Oh, it's just so gross to even think about. Let's listen here to an interview with an FBI profiler who insists that it is very likely that the Delphi murder arrest is going to somehow involve Keegan Kline. The reporter is asking the FBI profiler about Richard Allen and asks the same question many people are wondering. Where did this man come from? We hadn't even heard the name Richard Allen before. Let's listen to what the FBI profiler has to say.
And as we said, this is a case we've been following closely here at News Nation. I know I've personally been interested in this. Never heard this name before, though. Had Richard Allen ever been on your radar? Because I know his name was never mentioned publicly before.
It had not been on my radar or anyone's that I know of. Now, I've never been personally involved in this investigation as law enforcement. And when I retired about 4 years ago, we continued to get some tips into my private agency that we would pass on. But no, that's not a name I've ever heard come up.
Well, so Doug, Kelly kind of walked us through the ins and outs of this case, now more than 5 years in the making. This arrest coming now. Why now?
Some piece of information's come in, some piece of evidence has been found. I can only speculate like everybody else, but it seems to be after the arrest of this Keegan Kline that it seemed like they were kind of homing in on something. So I don't know if he's even still connected or not. I hate to speculate, but it just seems like there's probably some sort of connection.
Yeah, and I do want to ask you more about Keegan, but, it's possible that Richard Allen, who, again, obviously has not been found guilty, hasn't even been named officially by police, but, he's now under arrest, could have been on the run at this point for more than 5 years, living among the community. Did authorities maybe know more than they let on?
Oh, I'm sure they knew more than they made public. When you're investigating something like this, the only time you're going to release information to the public is if you think it can help you resolve this case. And I know everybody wants to know, but there's just no good reason to put out information unless you think it will help bring in tips or spark somebody's memory or something like that. So most likely they've been keeping some bits of information close to the vest, and it's now culminated in this arrest.
And of course, that makes sense. And we have heard of these recent FBI searches, potential suspects investigators have been looking into. As Kelly mentioned, this man, Keegan Kline, he has been a focus of the investigation. I want to play for you what Doug Carter with Indiana State Police said about Kline to our Rich McHugh back in February.
Did Abby and Libby communicate with this profile?
I'm not going to talk about that, but I am going to say that we learned a tremendous amount through that particular investigative course.
What can you tell me about this man who has been arrested, the creator of this profile, Keegan Kline?
All I can say about Keegan is that entire issue and the entire release has allowed us to glean significant investigative leads.
All right, so Doug, with your expertise, help us read between the lines here. Is there more going on? Could Kline still be connected?
It's possible. Just speculating, of course, here, but it seems likely to me based on my professional experience. He's got his own issues with the charges that he's facing, and perhaps he provided the information that led to this arrest and could be given some credit. It's hard to say, but I would think it's very likely.
Yes, so many people interested in this case, and it looks like now finally moving forward. Former FBI agent Doug Coons, we thank you, sir, so much for your time.
The article I'm about to refer to was posted on November 14th, 2022, and was updated the following day on November 15th, 2022. This recording was originally made just moments after it was revised and posted on the 15th. Okay, so there's two pieces of information here that are important. Number one, this is the information that was released yesterday, November 14th in the afternoon. It is that Richard Allen, who was arrested in the murders of Abby Williams and Liberty German, had told a state conservation officer he was in the area on the day of the killings, but his report may have been considered unfounded. And this is a police source telling News Channel 8. So Richard Allen, we know he's age 50, apparently went to the conservation officer right after Abby and Libby's murders on February 17th, 2017. And he told the conservation officer that he was on the Monon High Bridge that afternoon, but he didn't see the two girls. Again, this is what the police source tells News Team 8. So apparently, Allen's statement was forgotten until recently when Indiana police became frustrated when the status of the Delphi investigation, and they asked a group of investigators to look over some files that were related to the case. So this article also says that investigators believe Allen is the man on the bridge in the cell phone video and in the sketches released by police. And again, this is a police source telling News Team 8. Another piece of bombshell information that was just released today is that the search of the Wabash River that was linked to the Delphi investigation, it is definitively linked to the Delphi investigation, police sources tell News Channel 8. So this article says the police source also confirms that the recent 5-week state police search of the Wabash River in Peru was connected to the Delphi investigation. It was initiated after Keegan Kline told police they would find a cell phone and a weapon in the river. The source tells I-Team 8. Man. Keegan Kline, age 28, was linked to the murders. As we know, he's not been charged in the case, but he revealed that information while he was being questioned about the deaths of Libby and Abby. So the evidence, the cell phone and the weapon that Keegan said might be in the Wabash River was never found, and unfortunately, Keegan Kline is known for lying to investigators. As it stands, after prosecutors dropped 5 felony charges, Keegan Kline faces 25 child porn-related charges in a separate case tied to the use of a social media profile we all know as Anthony Shots. So there you have it, folks. The connection between Keegan Kline and Richard Allen has officially been made. Wow. And also, the news about Richard Allen reporting to the conservation officer that he had been on the Monon High Bridge that afternoon and he didn't see Abby and Libby. I cannot even believe that that information somehow got lost. Delphi is a very small town, much like the small town that I grew up in. It took 5 years to find and apprehend the murderer of Abby Williams and Liberty German. I mean, guys, how hard could it be to keep track of the information about local residents who fit the profile? So lastly, justice for Abby and Libby.